Шановні колеги, українські медіа.
UCMC of reforms continues its work. Now we'll be talking about one of the most topical reforms for our economy, tax reform. There are different ideas on how these changes should be implemented, but eventually it is all about two projects, two drafts. There is a point of view of the government and alternative point of view, which is in the draft law 3157 that was signed by many MPs and experts. Today we'll be talking about whether there is a liberal tax reform, whether it is the solution to the crisis or a threat for state budget. I would like to invite the experts to take the floor.
Добрый день, друзья, коллеги.
Good afternoon. My colleagues allowed me to be the first one. I am Sokolov Mykhailo. I am an expert at the Reanimation package of reforms, and I am also the Deputy Chairman of Ukrainian Agrarian Council. My colleagues requested me to be the first one to speak because I participated in drafting the law, and I will be talking about positive things, innovations which are of importance and which are of the benefit for Ukrainian economy and Ukrainian business. I believe that that draft is a mini revolution because it's making so many important things. This draft law is not just about rates, it's about administering as well. And the changes in administering which are there are of revolutionary nature. First of all, we introduced the tax on distributed profit. Many say that that's more difficult than the regular system. I believe it's not. Probably it's more complicated from the point of view of describing it in the tax code, but not from the point of view of using that by taxpayer. If the taxpayer is not part of exotic groups, it will not be paying it until it pays dividends because it doesn't have any program payments. It will simplify the work of the company because once you are not planning to pay dividends, you just conduct your activities and you have nothing to report on. This is a big breakthrough, talking about freeing investments from taxation, because now we need to have internal investments in Ukraine so that the money is invested. Another very important thing is what was done with the system of administering VAT. This is also a revolutionary norm. For example, the public register of the requests for repayment is created. So no one will take bribes for repaying to you faster than to someone else, because they will be repaid only in accordance with that list. And you see who's in the list, the number of taxpayers indicated there, the sum of repayment, and nothing can be changed. Some people say that there's no mechanism that would allow to control. What other mechanism do you need when the country sees how this register is compiled and who, when, and what amount should receive? I was myself drafting this section. I could not think of anything more transparent than that. There's one more important innovation. This law will introduce what was promised in the past. All the tax credit which is formed is recognized as the legitimate. There are only two reasons the mistake in the number of identification code. Like, for example, I wanted to give it to Petya, but I had to give it to Vasya, then I should do it differently. Or if I register the bill of lading as the bill of lading for transaction, which is not to be taxed, but nothing else, then you cancel it. And then this is important for taxpayers who are tired because the tax authorities refuse to repay the tax, the VAT. Also, the same way we address the problem of canceling the certificate on of the VAT payer. There is also reduction of rates, increase of overdraft. These items are disputable, but my colleagues will be talking about them. One more important thing is the reform of the state pension fund. The regional departments of the state pension service, there will be the control only at the level of the regions and in the offices of large taxpayers, but what they do at the district level, no one knows. We had to introduce the system of risk assessment and just sending inspection only when you have the suspicion in some fraud. We are forcing the tax authorities to do what they didn't want to do, to reconstruct themselves, and we also force them to reduce the number of people there. What will that mean for taxpayer? There will be no more terror from local guys who say, just give me at least something. This will all be in the past. In general, we can keep on enumerating many other things, but I would like to say that there were unique things done in the process itself. That's the first case when such a large draft law was not developed, was not drafted only by some ministry, but in the committee, and they were inviting the experts from different groups with different opinions. There were many debates, many disputes, and in many cases this openness resulted in us having quite a good text. We need to work on it more, but what we know for sure, that it sets the correct vector. We need to simplify administration and reduce the level of tax burden. First of all, the tax burden on salary fund, and this is the last thing I wanted to share. We all understand without reduction of the burden on the salary fund, there will be no future, there will be no getting out of shadow. We have an enormous burden. The developing countries don't have that, and this is one of the major factors which push our economy into the shadow and which block its development. So by that draft law, we do what the Ministry of Finance just promised to do. That is a big step forward, and we would like this reduction to be more radical, but there are certain restrictions that my colleagues will talk about. Good afternoon, Illya Neskhodovskyi, the chief expert at the Reanimation package of reforms, tax reform group. I would like to say what is positive in this draft. For a long time, our system of economy was dependent on the requests made by the civil servants. The civil servants would define what they would like to get from the state budget, and then based on that, they were extracting the money from the economy in the form of taxes. And the result, our economy has become an outsider in its economic development. We are the poorest country of Europe. We have the biggest decrease of GDP. Even doing business shows that changes in business climate concern only registration of businesses. As a result, no one invests into Ukraine because we have a high level of corruption, we have war, and many other factors. In the result, investor just refuses to invest in Ukraine. And so we need to make steps so that the economy gets revived, so that business starts earning money, so that it doesn't think about any inspections, so that they don't feel any pressure. And that is what the draft law is directed towards, to remove any possibility to interfere into the activities of the business, to allow business to develop, to earn money, to pay taxes, and then our country will become richer. Now, talking about the topic of our briefing, having analyzed the budget, the RPR experts came to conclusion that there's a fiscal gap. It's not like it was mentioned by the Ministry of Finance, more than 200 billion hryvnias, but this gap is quite significant, about 145 billion hryvnias. It is to be covered because such a fiscal gap that we have in the result of the reform cannot be included into the state budget. Certain measures are to be taken to reduce it so that our costs and revenues balance. We analyzed the changes which were made by the ministry in direction of reducing the budgetary expenditures. And we found out that there were no reductions. The budgets are at the same level, even certain steps. Like the decision was made to create the fund of social insurance, but even that decision hasn't been implemented. As to reducing the number of civil servants, that decision hasn't been implemented, and that's where the biggest potential is. We believe that there are many functions in the state which are maybe not reasonable, or in conditions of war they are not substantiated enough. The state has to get rid of these functions and reduce funding. We also believe that we need to change our system of social assistance to targeted assistance. When a person receives several apartments, several cars, and they receive social services, social assistance, this approach is wrong. The state should help only those who cannot support himself or herself, the sick people, disabled, those who continue to look for the way out of the situation, but this should be done in the amount which will only cover the minimum subsistence level. Also now the expenditures on medical services are counted based on the number of beds, but that is wrong. Also, we need to analyze the expenditures in the rural areas, because per one student in village, the state spends 60,000-70,000 hryvnias, because there are few people there, but they have to maintain the premises and the teachers and so on. Now, if those and also the sectoral ministry and the Ministry of Finance are to work on all these things. I would like to thank the Ministry of Finance because they are doing a lot. They introduced the system of transparent government procurements. You now can see the tenders and you can fight corruption in this sphere, and that was the most corrupt sphere. But the Ministry of Finance introduces the system of open budget, and that will allow us to see all the expenditures. We will be able to see the aggregated indicator, and we'll be able to see how our money is spent, and we will be able to make conclusion whether we need such expenditures or not. If that is not enough to overcome the fiscal gap, then the following measures are to be implemented. First of all, reduce the VAT rate down to 15% when we need economic growth, but we have no capacities to reduce the tax burden. The direct taxes should be reduced. The profit tax and only secondly the VAT. If it's reduced down to 15%, it's not feasible. So we believe that it could be left in the amount of 20%. Then the draft says that you can register tax bill of ladings as tax commitments which are registered but not paid. We believe that that is something that can also initiate tax pits. There will be schemes which will allow to add overdraft and registered tax bill of ladings. And the companies which will be disappearing. This mechanism is not admissible. We expected that from electronic system of VAT administering, we will get revenues, additional revenues, because we were losing up to 60-80 billion hryvnias from tax pits, and we believe that these revenues will be in the amount of 30 billion, but now we believe that we cannot count on them. And one more thing which allows to overcome the fiscal gap, that is introducing the tax for real estate. So that it will realistically fill in the state budget. My colleague will talk about that in more detail. Volodymyr Dubrovskyi, also the expert of RPR. My role is to talk about some deficiencies, but I would like to start saying that this project is revolutionary. We call upon supporting it in the first reading, because what is in it can change relations between this business and the state. I used to say that we need to organize the Day of Independence of Entrepreneur from tax authorities. If this draft becomes the law, then such a day will become the reality, because the tax on distributed profit differs from what we have now. It will be administered without the control over expenditures. The expenditures of the company could be whatever, no one has the right to control them, and so they cannot oppress the entrepreneur, threat the entrepreneur, and do things which tax authorities are doing. So we support, we call upon supporting it, but unfortunately there were several things included which are incompatible with this ideology. There are some steps made to reduce the use of the simplified system. They say that the third group should be pushed into the group of general taxpayers. If there is an accounting of expenditures, there should be control of expenditures, then the inspector can make some decision. There is discretion. If there is a discretion, there is a corruption. Removing this corruption for legal entities and for more or less big companies, this simplified entrepreneurs are pushed into the corruption field. I don't know why they are doing it, maybe just to organize some source of income for the tax workers. Also, they reduce the types of activities.
В системі так, вони є. Ми знаємо про них, ми навіть їх.
We examined all these issues, but in their volumes they are dozens of times smaller than the violations of the entrepreneurs who are on the general system of taxation. First, we need to reform the general system of taxation so that there are no abuse there, and only that we need to think about the abuse and the simplified system of taxation. So we suggest that the articles on simplified system should be cancelled, should be revoked, especially when it comes to control of the relations. That says that the relations of taxpayer are to be controlled. If someone sells to the entrepreneur at a sale, then such sale is considered to be taxed at a certain rate. These things are to be removed because, in fact, they will not have any fiscal effect. We will not be able to close the gap by them. Everything that is there, it's about several billion hryvnias, but we are talking about 145 billion. So there's no sense to introduce such changes. They would just distort the ideology of the law, and small business will not support it. So we suggest to remove these norms and to support the draft in the first reading. But even if it is supported, that's not the end, because everyone understands that the law which creates the gap, a hole in the budget, cannot be approved. We cannot reduce the budget, because that means a quarter of the budget. And we suggest to reduce the budget within the limits it is possible to do so, and also to exercise pressure on the government. And this should, in the Constitution, there should be a norm on the limit for redistribution via state finances, 35%, and that's it. There should be some provisional, temporary provisions, but the government, or transitional provisions, but the government should have an objective that in 2018 they have to redistribute not more than 35%. Everything which is above is anti-constitutional. Secondly, it is about improvement of VAT administering, and third is tax on real estate, property tax. That's a big element of the whole system. Why property tax? That is the tax which could be administered, non-discretionary. Everything should be transparent. The payer should receive some calculation from tax authorities. If they agree, they pay. If they disagree, there's a mechanism of appeal against. But there's no chance to come to an agreement. It all happens transparently. We believe that the best way will be taxing the land according to differentiated rate. Under the building, the rate will be different than just the land. And the cost of land should be defined via calculation according to the formula. And so this way we will get this imputed assessment of land. That mechanism will not allow any abuse. The one who calculates the formula will not know how it will be applied, to who it will be applied, and we believe that's acceptable for Ukraine. This tax could be collected from physical persons, but the one who pays the physical personal income tax will not feel it. Those who do not pay direct taxes but live for money which exceed what they earn. Well, we are planning to develop that tax. We are planning to add to the reform suggested by Madam Yuzhanina, and this will allow to balance the budget and to leave all the advantages of the draft. Thank you. Any questions?
Good day, Ilya Lukash. And there were many discussions about the proposals of Yeriska to even all the taxes 2020, and your draft law is about reduction, and there will be a gap. So did you come to some sort of compromise, or whether there will be two draft laws of yours and of Minfin and the Ministry of Finances, and what support do you have now? And this is not our draft law. This law is draft law is developed by the committee of the Verkhovna Rada, and experts give their advice as to different divisions, articles of this law. But if this law is fully ours, we won't criticize it. Absolutely, we would say that everything is okay there. But there's a lot of groups that took part in the wording of this law and analyzing the expertise. We made some conclusions. What will be done by the Ministry of Finance is very difficult to predict. The draft law is unknown to the public. No one knows about it. There was a presentation, as I know. The draft law is they have this draft law, and the budget is written according to this law, and there can be an option that it can be introduced, and due to through blackmail, or you adopt it, or you lead the country to catastrophe. So the way we see it, we wanted to cooperate with the Ministry of Finance, but it won't happen maybe, and they worked separately from us. And at the National Council there was a special division that would develop this draft, but they were removed, and this law was written unilaterally, and that's why we have such a result. But we would like that Minfin, the Ministry of Finance, would cooperate with us, and that we establish best practices, and but we see problems here because we didn't see what they wrote, and maybe if they presented this law, we would make some advice, some suggestions about it. There are things that are incompatible. So the approach of the Ministry of Finance is just to leave everything like it is now. And our approach that we think is correct, and that it was accepted by the working group at the Ministry of the Supreme Council, is to replace it with the distributed profit tax. It's absolutely different thing. And if we are speaking about rates, maybe we can tell about it, speak about it, but the approach of the Ministry of Finance is not understandable. We don't understand why these figures are shown, why these rates. So we just say this is for just for the beauty of the thing. So Yuriska said this is the same, just for beauty. And we think differently in these calculations, and of course we can negotiate about rates, but the principal things that we discussed, they should remain. Those things that connected with administering, and as to the profit tax, there's no mechanism of administering of profit tax that would be not discretional and won't envisage the control of expenditures. That's why we insist that this should be the tax for distributed profit, and it's not of Estonian character that is advertised by Abramovichus. And we propose the Hong Kong variant. So do you have a question? I have a question. I know that previously, it's not the first time that we present some new draft laws, some laws starting from Maidan, and the experts spoke with International Monetary Fund, and they shared their experience. And did you speak with them this time? And what is the key issue here? Maybe the balancing of the budget, and how can we achieve it? what are the possibilities to hear each other and to help, because this is our main what are the variants, whether it will be adopted, and what is the role of International Monetary Fund in this issue?
МВФ чергову зустріч.
Yeah, we hope that there will be another meeting with the IMF after Madam Yuzhanina submitted the draft. We had no chance to meet. The mission should be in Kiev in the beginning of November. And I hope that we will have meetings with this mission. We were meeting several times and we presented our drafts and they were perceived with understanding, but the IMF has some concerns. Will it be possible to do everything to fill in the budget? Maybe we will need some additional loans, or maybe we will have to print out money, more additional money. If we prove that there is the chance to fill in the budget, that we can arrive at the deficit which is planned in the memorandum of IMF, then I believe such cooperation is possible. I hope that we will manage to do that. Thank you, colleagues. Any other questions? We have time left only for one question.
Лаконічно.
Хоча приблизні розрахунки є.
Do you have at least approximate calculations as to the growth of economy, like 30 billion you're planning to save on public procurements? You mentioned medical education, what, 20-30%? Are you talking about, well, do you mean how much will economy grow? How much? How much the expenditures could be compensated during the year? There's an element which hasn't been mentioned, and we talk about that all the time. What hampers is that there is no fighting with corruption. And here, just like in Georgia, we believe that combating corruption is not just the element of healthening the relations, but it will help fill in the budget. 7,000 only.
Який вкрав
With billions stolen by the previous president, and the billion schemes which existed in Mizgiri and which are now. In this context, as to education, as to public health, for public health, the ministry itself should do it. I'm talking about calculations. We have proposals in our group about how can the system of financing of public health, how could it be improved, because there's money allocated, but we know what quality is. I haven't seen the person who would be happy with the quality of medical services. The same is true about education. I cannot tell you what are the calculations for education, because what I mentioned is what we received from the Ministry of Education. It's not up to the Ministry of Finance, it's up to the whole government. Each ministry should understand that for the next year, they have to review their budget and reduce the budget, because the economy cannot give more. I would like to answer directly your question. We wouldn't come up here if we did not have calculations. It's about 45-50 billion for VAT, 30 billion for what Ilya was saying for corruption. We believe that Prozora project will be successful. And social fund.
Які треба, у нас є теж проєкт по тому, як їх.
We have the project of how to reform that. And another 50-60 billion property tax. Corruption.
Нет, там нет, не бюджет. Там 40, может быть, миллиардов можно оттуда взять. Мы об этом говорим осторожно, потому что вопрос, как реформировать.
We are saying that carefully because we don't have the answer to the question how to reform the customs. We know how to reform the public procurements. We do hope it will be better if we manage to reform it.
Можна компенсувати всю суму, і ми
And in our calculations, we do not count that there will be economic growth and de-shadowization. We know this will happen, but we do not know how much of it. And we say that the protected articles of the budget are to be financed without that. If there are some additional revenues, okay. And I wish us all to receive a tax reform which will satisfy, if not everyone, but at least will give an impetus to the development of the economy. And this is the end of the working day today.